Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if being a bit impulsive messes with how you make important decisions, especially when you are getting information from different senses like seeing and hearing at the same time? Well, this new study might have a clue. This study looked into a really interesting question. Does impulsivity, the tendency to act without thinking too much, affect how our brain combines information from our eyes and ears to make decisions? Especially in young adults, some of whom have conditions like ADHD or disruptive behavior disorders that often involve higher impulsivity. You see, when we can use multiple senses like hearing a car honk and seeing its headlights, we're usually much better at figuring things out. It is like getting extra clues, but impulsivity is known to lead to making worse decisions or acting too quickly. So the big question here is, do these impulsive traits mess with this superpowered multisensory decision making? To figure this out, the researchers designed a clever experiment. They had 40 young adults, some with ADHD or similar conditions, and some without, play a game on a computer. Imagine you have to tell which side something is on. Sometimes it was just a visual thing, like seeing two slightly different patterns and picking the one that was more contrasty or brighter. Other times, it was just sound, where you had to say which side had the louder noise. And the really interesting part was when they combined both the visual and auditory information at the same time. They also made the task either easy or hard by changing how similar the target. The thing you were supposed to focus on was to the distractor, the other less important thing. So in the hard version, the lines were blurrier, or the sounds were closer in volume, making it trickier. Before the game, everyone filled out questionnaires. One was the Barrett Impulsiveness Scale, which measures different types of impulsivity. They also used parts of another questionnaire called the Youth Self-Report to look at things like attention problems, aggressive behavior, and rule-breaking behavior, which are often linked to higher impulsivity. And here is where it gets really interesting. After crunching all the numbers, the researchers found something quite surprising. It turns out that impulsivity and those related behaviors didn't really seem to affect how well the participants could combine visual and auditory information to make decisions. Whether they were super impulsive or not, people were generally better and faster when they got information from both eyes and ears, which is the multisensory benefit we expect. Looking at the accuracy, people were most accurate on the combined audiovisual trials, which is great. And when it came to speed, they were fastest on the auditory trials. But again, this was generally true across the board, regardless of how impulsive someone was. They even did some fancy Bayesian statistics, which are really good at providing evidence for the null hypothesis. Basically, the idea that there is no effect, and the results strongly supported the idea that impulsivity just wasn't making a difference in their overall performance accuracy, or how fast they responded. But the study went even deeper. They also looked at how the brain weighs information over time. Think of it like this: when you are making a decision, do you rely more on the stuff you saw or heard right at the beginning, or the stuff that came in later, closer to when you actually made your choice? This is called sensory evidence weighting. They found that generally people relied more on the early bits of information, whether it was visual or auditory. This makes sense. You often form an initial impression. In audiovisual trials, it was particularly interesting. Early on, both visual and auditory information seemed to be weighed equally. Then there was a period where vision seemed to take the lead. And finally, the very last bit of auditory information played a big role in making the decision. And guess what? Even when they looked at these temporal dynamics, how the brain weighs information moment by moment, impulsivity still didn't make a difference. The patterns of how information was weighted over time were pretty much the same for everyone, no matter their impulsivity scores. So, what's the big takeaway here? The researchers are suggesting that for this particular task, which used fairly simple stimuli, our brain's ability to integrate sensory information isn't really thrown off by how impulsive we are. The system seems pretty robust. It is almost like for this type of decision-making, the core mechanisms of how we combine sights and sounds are so fundamental that individual differences in impulsivity don't significantly disrupt them. They hypothesized that this might be because the stimuli they used weren't overly complex. This kind of processing might happen automatically in a bottom-up way before our conscious attention really gets involved. If it is happening at that early stage, then factors like impulsivity, which might affect later more deliberate top-down processing, might not have as much of an impact. Now, it is important to note that this study's findings are a bit different from some earlier research, especially when looking at people with ADHD. Part of that difference might be due to the different types of tasks used, or the stimuli. This study used simple visual patterns and sounds. Other studies might have used more complex tasks where attention plays a bigger role, and that's where impulsivity-related issues with attention might become more apparent. Also, the participants in this study were a bit more motivated by money, which can sometimes make people perform better. So, while this study found a good deal of robustness against impulsivity for this specific type of task, it doesn't necessarily mean impulsivity has no effect on multisensory integration in all situations. The researchers themselves acknowledge that future studies could explore if more complex tasks, or tasks that heavily rely on controlled attention, might show a different story. It is also worth noting that the study used a specific set of questionnaires and statistical methods. Different measures of impulsivity or different analysis techniques could potentially reveal subtle effects. But overall, this is a really valuable piece of research. It adds to our understanding of how our brains seamlessly blend information from different senses and suggests that, at least in young adults and for simpler tasks, this core function is surprisingly resilient to individual differences in impulsivity. Think about it this way for yourself. When you are making a quick judgment based on what you see and hear, the mechanisms involved might be so automatic and efficient that your level of impulsivity doesn't get in the way. It's the brain's way of ensuring we can navigate the world effectively, even if we have a tendency to sometimes act without thinking too much. What do you think about these findings? Does it surprise you that impulsivity didn't seem to play a role here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.